The wedding reception was in full swing that evening. The sound of laughter, soft chatter, and the gentle clinking of glasses filled the wide banquet hall. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling, and the smell of roasted food mixed with the sweetness of flowers that covered every table. It was the kind of celebration that felt warm and full of life, a day everyone would remember. Among the servers moving quickly but quietly between the tables was a young woman named Emily. She wore the same uniform as the others, a crisp white shirt, a black vest, and her hair tied neatly back, but something about her carried a calmness that stood out. While others rushed from one end of the hall to the other, Emily worked carefully with steady hands and a soft smile for the guests she passed. She didn't really belong in this kind of place. A few months earlier, Emily had been sitting in a small apartment wondering how to pay her rent after her part-time music teaching job was cut. She had always loved music, the piano especially. It was her escape, her voice, her way of telling stories when words didn't come easily. But now, instead of performing, she was carrying trays of food and drinks at other people's celebrations, trying to make ends meet. Still, she didn't complain. She needed the money, and the catering company she worked for treated her fairly enough. She often told herself, it's just temporary. Someday I'll play again. But deep inside, she didn't really believe it anymore. Life had a way of pushing dreams aside when bills piled up. The reception that night was beautiful. The bride and groom looked radiant, surrounded by friends and family who couldn't stop smiling. The music from the hired band filled the background, cheerful pop songs that made people tap their feet or hum along. Emily stayed near the back at first, serving appetizers and drinks to the tables closest to the dance floor. Every so often, her eyes drifted toward the piano sitting in the far corner of the hall. It was a lovely instrument, polished wood that gleamed under the soft light. No one was using it that night since the couple had chosen to hire a band instead. But for Emily, that piano wasn't just a decoration. It was a reminder of everything she had left behind. She had learned to play when she was just 6 years old, sitting beside her grandfather, who had been a church pianist. He used to tell her, "A piano doesn't just make sound, it speaks if you listen carefully." She grew up believing that. For years, she spent hours practicing, dreaming of performing on big stages, and she had come close. Scholarships, small competitions, even a few concerts. But then life changed. Her grandfather passed away, her family moved, and her mother fell ill. One thing led to another, and Emily had to choose between her dreams and her responsibilities. Now, she watched people dance and laugh while pretending not to see the piano at all. As she passed by one of the tables near the front, an older man called out to her. He was in his 60s with a kind face and a cheerful grin. He'd been joking with the other guests all evening. When Emily stopped beside him to refill his drink, he tilted his head toward the corner and said, "Tell me something, young lady. Do you play?" Emily blinked, unsure what he meant at first. "Play?" "The piano," he said, pointing toward it with his glass. "You keep glancing at it like it's calling your name." Her face warmed immediately. She hadn't realized she'd been looking at it that often. "Oh, I used to," she said softly. "A little." The man smiled, clearly amused. "Used to? Well, that's no good. We have a perfectly fine piano sitting there gathering dust. Someone ought to make it sing tonight." Several guests at the table laughed. A woman nearby said teasingly, "Come on, let her work, Harold." "She's busy." But Harold wasn't ready to drop it. "Nonsense. She looks like she has music in her fingers. Don't you?" Emily didn't know what to say. She smiled politely, trying to steer the conversation away. "I'm sure the band will play something nice later," she said, trying to sound cheerful. The man nodded, but kept that mischievous spark in his eyes. "Maybe, but I have a feeling they can't play like you could." A few people at nearby tables had overheard the exchange. Some smiled, others whispered. The bride herself, sitting not far away, turned to see what was going on. "What's happening?" she asked with curiosity. Harold chuckled. "I was just asking your lovely server here if she could play a tune for us." She seemed shy. The bride's eyes lit up instantly. "Wait, really? You can play piano?" Emily hesitated, holding the empty pitcher close to her chest. "I used to," she said again, trying to keep her voice even. "A long time ago. That's perfect," the bride said, standing up a little. "You should play something. It's our wedding. Let's make it special." Emily froze. The other servers nearby turned their heads, unsure what to do. The catering manager at the back gave her a small warning look, clearly not wanting the staff to become part of the entertainment. "Oh, I shouldn't," Emily said quickly. "I'm working." "I really can't," but the crowd had already taken an interest. A few guests began clapping lightly, others calling out, "Let her play," or just one song. Harold raised his glass again. "Come on now, don't keep us waiting. One song won't hurt. You'll make this night unforgettable." Emily's heart was pounding. She didn't want to cause trouble for her boss, but at the same time she felt a pull, a small, quiet voice inside her whispering that maybe, just maybe, she should say yes. Her manager walked over looking uneasy. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a low tone. The bride turned to him, smiling brightly. "Not at all. We just want your server to play one song on the piano. Please, it's my wedding wish." The manager sighed. It wasn't a request he could easily deny. With dozens of guests watching, he forced a polite smile. "If that's what you'd like, ma'am." Then turning to Emily, he added quietly, "Just one song. Then get back to work, all right?" Emily nodded slowly. Her throat felt dry and her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't touched a real piano in months, maybe a year. What if she messed up? What if people laughed? The guests began to cheer as she walked toward the piano. Her steps felt heavy, and she could feel hundreds of eyes following her across the room. Someone dimmed the lights near the band area, leaving a soft glow around the corner where the piano waited. When she reached it, she ran her hand gently over the smooth surface, as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The lid creaked softly as she lifted it. The black and white keys stared back at her, familiar and strange all at once. She sat down slowly, adjusting the stool. The room had grown quieter now. Even the band members stood aside, curious to see what would happen. The hum of conversation faded into a hush. Emily took a deep breath. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the piano's glossy finish. She thought of her grandfather, sitting beside her all those years ago, saying, "When you play, don't just press the keys. Tell the truth with your heart." Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She wasn't sure what to play. She hadn't planned for this, hadn't practiced. But deep inside, she knew one song that always felt like home. She closed her eyes and let her fingers fall. The first few notes were soft and unsure, but as the melody began to unfold, something inside her shifted. The nervousness melted away, replaced by a quiet focus. The sound drifted across the room like a whisper at first, then grew warmer, fuller. The chatter stopped completely. People turned in their seats, drawn toward the music. Emily barely noticed them. She was somewhere else now, a place where time didn't matter, where every note was a memory, every chord a breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive. The elderly man who had asked her to play leaned back in his chair, smiling in wonder. The bride and groom held hands, watching in silence. Even the catering manager, who had been ready to stop her at any moment, stood still at the back of the room, his expression softening. The song filled the hall, delicate and pure, wrapping around everyone like a story only music could tell. By the time Emily finished the last note, her heart was racing. For a moment there was only silence. Then all at once the room burst into applause. For a few seconds after the last note faded, the room stayed completely still. Emily sat at the piano, hands resting on her lap, unsure if she had done something wrong. Then like a wave, the applause began. Soft at first, then growing louder and louder until it filled the whole hall. Some guests stood up, clapping with wide smiles. Others just looked amazed, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Even the bride, her eyes shining, covered her mouth in surprise. Emily felt her face heat up as the noise surrounded her. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. The elderly man who had asked her to play raised his glass high and said loudly, "I knew it. I told you she had music in her hands." His words made everyone laugh and cheer even more. Emily gave a shy smile and a small nod before standing up. She wanted to slip back into her quiet world, to blend into the background again. But before she could move, the bride called out, "Wait, please play another one." The crowd agreed instantly. "Yes, one more," several people shouted. Emily hesitated, glancing toward her manager at the back of the room. He stood there with his arms crossed, but instead of looking upset, there was something different in his expression, almost like pride. He gave her a small nod, her heart pounded again. Part of her wanted to run back to the kitchen and hide, but another part, the one she had buried for years, wanted to keep going. So she sat down once more. She thought for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. Then she started to play something softer, something familiar, a simple melody she had written herself long ago. She had never performed it for anyone before. The music floated gently through the hall. It wasn't a song people recognized, but somehow it touched them all the same. There was something personal in it, something honest. It carried sadness and hope together, like the story of someone who had lost their way but hadn't given up. As she played, Emily forgot where she was. She didn't see the tables or the crowd. She didn't think about her job or the bills waiting at home. All she felt was the music, the way the notes seemed to come alive under her fingers. When the song ended, there was silence again. Not the kind of silence that feels awkward, the kind that holds emotion. Then, one by one, people began to clap again, softer this time, as if they didn't want to break the moment. Emily looked up and realized some of the guests were wiping tears from their eyes. The bride was one of them. She walked over, still holding her bouquet, and said, "That was beautiful. I've never heard anything like it." Emily smiled, her eyes wet. "Thank you," she said softly. "What's the name of that song?" The bride asked. "I never gave it a name," Emily said. "It's something I wrote a long time ago." The guests murmured in surprise. One of them asked, "You wrote that? That's incredible." Emily didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something she was used to. She just nodded politely and stood up again, feeling both shy and happy at the same time. The older man who had started it all got up and approached her. "You made this night unforgettable," he said warmly. "You have a gift, young lady. Don't ever forget that." Emily smiled, but deep down she wondered if it really mattered. A gift didn't pay rent or buy groceries. She was grateful, but part of her still felt like this moment would end soon, that she'd go back to her normal life and everyone here would move on. As the night went on, people kept talking about her performance. Some guests even came up to her while she worked, thanking her for playing. One woman said it reminded her of her late mother, who used to play the piano at home. Another said the song felt like a piece of someone's heart. Emily didn't know how to respond to all that. She just smiled and said thank you, again and again. Inside, she felt something stirring, a feeling she hadn't had in years. When the dinner service ended, the band began to play again. The music was upbeat and cheerful, but somehow the earlier moment still lingered in the air. People kept glancing at the piano as if it had become part of the story of the night. During a quiet moment, the bride came up to Emily again. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Of course," Emily replied. "Why did you stop playing?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure how much to share, but something about the bride's kind eyes made her feel safe to answer. "My family went through a hard time," Emily said after a pause. "My mom got sick and I had to start working. I guess life just happened." The bride nodded slowly. "I understand. But you should know, you have something rare. When you played, it didn't sound like someone performing. It sounded like someone feeling. That's what makes it special." Emily looked down, not trusting herself to speak. Before the bride could say more, the groom walked over, laughing. "You're the talk of the night," he said cheerfully. "Half the guests are saying you should have been part of the entertainment." Emily blushed. "Oh no, I think you hired a great band already," he smiled. Still, that was something else. "We'll never forget it." The couple thanked her again before returning to their guests. Emily stood there for a moment, taking it all in. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so alive, so seen. Later, when most of the guests had moved to the dance floor, Emily returned to the piano one last time. She sat quietly, looking at the keys, her reflection faint in the glossy surface. She touched the middle C gently, just one note, and listened to how clear it sounded in the empty space between songs. Her manager approached, standing a few feet away. "That was something," he said quietly. Emily turned. "I hope it was all right that I played." He shook his head. "All right?" The whole room stopped to listen. "You gave them a memory they'll talk about for years." She smiled. "Thank you for letting me do it," he shrugged. "Honestly, I didn't have a choice," the bride insisted. "But I'm glad she did. You've got real talent. Ever think of doing it again?" Emily let out a small laugh. "I don't know. It's been so long. I'm out of practice." He crossed his arms. "Didn't sound like it." She looked back at the piano. "Maybe, but it's just... life gets in the way sometimes," he nodded. Yeah, it does. But maybe sometimes life gives you a little push, too. They stood there for a moment listening to the music from the dance floor. Then the manager patted her shoulder and said, "All right, go grab a drink of water. You've earned it." As Emily walked away, she noticed Harold, the old man who had started everything, sitting quietly near the back of the hall. He smiled and gave her a small thumbs up when their eyes met. She smiled back. That small gesture felt bigger than applause. It felt like understanding. By the time the night ended, the guests were still talking about her performance. Some even asked for her name so they could look her up online, but she laughed and said, "I'm just part of the staff tonight." When everything was cleaned up and the hall was quiet again, Emily sat down at the piano one more time. She didn't play. She just sat there, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room smelled of flowers and candle wax. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. She took a slow breath and smiled to herself. It had been years since she'd felt that connection, that spark. Tonight reminded her it wasn't gone after all. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right moment to return. She whispered softly, "Thank you." Though she wasn't sure who she was thanking, the bride, the old man, the piano, or maybe the quiet voice inside her that had told her to say yes. Then she stood up, closed the piano lid, and walked toward the door. The sound of laughter and music faded behind her, but the feeling stayed. It was the feeling of something waking up again, something she thought she had lost for good. And though she didn't know it yet, that simple decision to play one song would soon change her life in ways she never imagined. The night after the wedding, Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the sound of applause echoing in her mind. The warmth of that moment, the way everyone had listened so quietly then clapped so hard, felt unreal. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. The piano, the song, the faces of people smiling, some even crying. It all felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. By morning, she told herself to forget about it. It had been just one special night, nothing more. She had work again that afternoon and she needed to focus. But when she arrived at the catering office, something was different. A few of her coworkers were looking at her and whispering. One of them, a cheerful young waiter, grinned and said, "You're famous." Emily blinked. "What are you talking about?" He handed her his phone. "Look at this." On the screen was a video. It showed her sitting at the piano at the wedding, playing the song she had written. Someone had filmed the whole thing, from the moment she sat down to the final note. The caption read, "The waitress who stole the show at the wedding." The video already had thousands of views. Emily's heart skipped. How did this get online?" she asked. "The guests posted it," another worker said. "Someone must have shared it on social media last night. It's everywhere." She scrolled through the comments. People were writing things like, "This gave me chills." You can feel her emotions in every note. Who is she? She needs to record this properly. Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind. By the end of the day, the video had spread even more. News pages had shared it, and people were tagging her workplace asking for her name. Her manager, who usually didn't talk much, called her into his office. He smiled when she walked in. "You're quite the sensation," he said. Emily sat down nervously. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen," she said quickly. "I just played because they asked me to." He laughed softly. "Relax, no one's upset. In fact, the company's getting good publicity from it. Everyone's talking about how our staff brings class and talent to every event." She smiled, a little embarrassed. "That's funny. More than funny," he said. "It's impressive. And honestly, Emily, you should be proud." She nodded quietly. "Thank you." After work, she went home and opened her laptop. She searched her own video again, curious. By then, it had been viewed nearly 100,000 times. Someone had added the title, "Waitress plays original piano piece and stuns everyone." As she watched, she saw herself through other people's eyes. The quiet girl sitting down shyly, her fingers shaking at first, then finding confidence. She could see the faces of the guests, their reactions, their awe. It made her heart swell. For the first time in years, she saw herself not as someone who gave up on music, but as someone who still had it inside her. That night, she received a message from the bride. It said, Everyone is still talking about you. You made our wedding unforgettable. Thank you for sharing your gift with us. I hope you never stop playing again." Emily stared at the message for a long moment, her eyes filled with tears. She typed back, "Thank you for giving me the courage to play again." The days that followed were strange. Her phone didn't stop buzzing. People were sending her messages, asking if she taught piano or if she would perform somewhere. Some music pages wanted to feature her story. It all felt overwhelming, but in a good way. Her neighbor, an older woman, who often shared morning tea with her, knocked on her door one afternoon holding her phone. "Is this you?" she asked with a smile. Emily laughed. "I guess it is." "I showed my granddaughter. She said you should start a channel," the woman said proudly. "You play with so much feeling." Emily thanked her, though she didn't know what to say. A channel? She'd never thought of that. That evening, she sat at her small keyboard at home, the same one she'd nearly sold months earlier when money was tight. It wasn't fancy, and a few keys stuck when pressed, but it was hers. She placed her fingers on the keys and started to play the same song she had performed at the wedding. This time, she recorded it on her phone. When she finished, she listened back, smiling softly. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She decided to post it online, not expecting much. She wrote a short caption. "I'm the girl from the wedding video. Thank you for all your kind words. This is the song I played. It's called Home." She hit upload and went to bed. By morning, her post had thousands of likes. People from all over the world were commenting. Some said it helped them relax, others said it reminded them of lost loved ones, and many simply wrote, "Please never stop playing." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She began playing every day again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Each night after work, she'd sit at her keyboard, write small melodies, and share them online. The views kept growing. So did the messages of encouragement. Her old teacher even reached out saying how proud he was to see her playing again. "You always had something special," he wrote. "Don't let this moment pass. Follow it." Soon, local news stations began contacting her. One small TV show asked if she'd like to perform live. Emily hesitated at first. She wasn't used to cameras or interviews, but something inside her whispered, "Say yes." When the day came, she stood on a small stage, wearing a simple blue dress. The host introduced her as the waitress who moved the internet with her music. Emily smiled nervously. When she sat down at the piano, she felt that same flutter in her chest she'd felt at the wedding, that mix of fear and excitement. Then she played. The audience fell silent again, just like that night. Every note seemed to float through the air, touching something deep in everyone listening. When she finished, the host looked speechless. Afterward, people flooded her page with messages. A few small record labels reached out. One even offered to help her record an album of her own songs. Emily couldn't believe it. She had gone from serving food at a wedding to being offered a chance to record music, all because she had said yes to one small request. But more than fame or opportunity, what mattered most to her was what she felt while playing. For years, she had carried a quiet emptiness inside her, believing her dreams were gone forever. Now that emptiness was filled again, with music, hope, and gratitude. One evening, after reading through hundreds of messages, she came across a comment that stopped her for a moment. It said, "You reminded me that it's never too late to start again." She stared at those words and smiled. That was exactly how she felt. Later that night, she went for a walk in the park near her apartment. The air was cool and the city lights reflected on the pond's surface. She thought about her grandfather, the man who had first taught her how to play. She wished he could see her now. She sat on a bench and whispered softly, "You were right. The piano really does speak if you listen." When she got home, she played again, not for an audience this time, not for a video, just for herself. Each note felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. Music, she realized, wasn't something you lose. It stays with you even when life pulls you away. You just have to find your way back. And she had. That night, she smiled to herself before going to bed. The journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. She didn't know what would happen next, but she didn't need to. All she knew was that something had changed. People saw her now, not as a server, not as a background figure, but as someone with a story, a sound, and a soul that spoke through music. And for the first time in a long, long while, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed felt like a blur for Emily. What started as one simple video from a wedding had turned into something far beyond what she could have imagined. Every morning she woke up to dozens of messages from people she didn't know, strangers from different countries, all telling her how her music had touched their hearts. Some wrote about how the song helped them feel calm during difficult times. Others said it reminded them of someone they loved and lost. One message said, "I was having a hard day and your piano music made me feel hope again." Reading those words made her eyes fill with tears. She had never thought her music could reach people in such a deep way. She had only been trying to express her feelings, but now she saw that those feelings spoke to others too. Her following grew quickly. People began calling her the wedding pianist, and more than one person asked when her next performance would be. It was strange and beautiful at the same time, to go from being almost invisible to being noticed by so many. Still, Emily stayed humble. She continued working at the catering company because she didn't want to assume fame would last forever. But everyone at work treated her differently now. Some teased her, saying, "Don't forget us when you're famous," while others asked for piano lessons for their kids. Even her manager, who once seemed serious and distant, smiled more when he saw her. "You've put our company on the map," he said one afternoon. "I'm proud of you." That meant a lot to her. One day, a local newspaper asked to interview her. They met at a small cafe where she usually went after work. The journalist, a kind woman with a notebook and gentle smile, asked simple questions at first. About the wedding, about how it felt to go viral. But then she leaned forward and asked softly, "I heard you studied music before. Why did you stop?" Emily hesitated. She looked down at her cup of tea, watching the steam rise. "I didn't want to stop," she said finally. "But my mother got sick, and I had to work to take care of her." One job turned into another, and eventually music just slipped away. The journalist nodded slowly. "That must have been hard." "It was," Emily admitted. "But I don't regret helping her. She always believed I'd play again someday." "I just didn't think it would happen like this," the journalist smiled. "Sometimes life finds its own way to bring us back to who we are." The interview was published 2 days later under the headline, "From Server to Star, the piano story that touched thousands." It spread quickly. People shared it online, saying how inspiring it was. Some even started fundraising to help her record her own album. One well-known music teacher reached out to her, offering free studio time if she wanted to create her own songs professionally. Emily was overwhelmed. She had never asked for any of this. She just wanted to play. Still, she accepted the offer. The next week, she visited a small studio for the first time. The smell of wood and warm lights made her nervous but excited. The sound engineer, a friendly man who loved classical music, helped her get comfortable. "Just play like you did at that wedding," he told her. "Don't think about anything else." She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began. The sound was richer than anything she'd heard before. Each note seemed to float in the air, full of life. She recorded 2 songs that day. One was her original piece, Home, and the other was something new she had been working on quietly at night. When she finished, the engineer said softly, "You have something rare. It's not just skill, it's emotion. That's what people feel when they listen." Hearing that made her smile. It felt like she was rediscovering a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. A few weeks later, the studio helped her release her songs online. They uploaded them under her name, with a simple picture of her sitting at the piano. Within days, the songs were streamed thousands of times. Listeners left heartfelt messages, thanking her for sharing her story. One night, while reading through the comments, Emily came across one that stood out. Emily's eyes widened. "I can't believe you're here. You started all of this, you know." He chuckled. "All I did was ask you to play." She shook her head. "You saw something in me when I couldn't see it myself. That moment changed everything." He looked around the room, watching the children laugh and play. "Seems like it changed a lot of lives," he said softly. Emily smiled. Music has a way of finding people when they need it most. They sat together for a while, listening to the students practicing. It was messy, offbeat, and full of mistakes, but it was beautiful. As the sun began to set, Emily walked him to the door. He turned to her and said, "Keep playing no matter what. The world needs more of this." "I will," she promised. Months passed. Her program grew and her own career continued to blossom. She released a small album made up of songs inspired by her journey, from the wedding to the hospital to the school. Each song carried a piece of her story, a piece of her heart. The album was called The Guest Request. It wasn't a chart topper, but it touched thousands. People wrote to her saying her music helped them through grief, loneliness, or simply gave them courage to try again. Emily read every message. Sometimes she'd smile, sometimes she'd cry, but every time she felt grateful. One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat at her piano again. The city outside was quiet, and the soft glow from a nearby lamp filled the room. Her fingers rested on the keys, and she began to play. Slowly, gently. A new melody flowed out, one she hadn't written before. It was warm and peaceful, like a conversation with an old friend. As she played, memories came flooding back, the wedding hall. The kind old man, the applause, her mother's smile, the children's laughter. It all felt connected somehow. She realized that music had never really left her. It had just been waiting, waiting for the right moment, the right reason. When she finished the song, she whispered to herself, "Thank you." Outside her window, the world moved on, cars passing, people laughing, life continuing. But inside that little room, a quiet kind of magic lingered. Emily leaned back, closed her eyes, and smiled. She didn't need fame anymore. She didn't need to prove anything. She had found what she was meant to do: share her gift, touch hearts, and remind people that beauty can rise from the most ordinary places. And somewhere, maybe in another wedding hall or quiet corner of the world, another person might one day sit down at a piano, take a deep breath, and play, not knowing that their music, too, could change lives. Because that's how it happens. Quietly, unexpectedly, one song at a time.